And 7 lessons from Buddha to live without fear or anxiety. Fear and anxiety are among the most pervasive experiences of the human mind. They shape our choices, cloud our vision, and keep us trapped in a cycle of uncertainty. In today's world, full of noise, endless comparisons, and the constant rush to achieve more, our minds rarely find peace. Yet thousands of years ago, the Buddha already understood the nature of these struggles. His teachings were not meant for monks alone, but for anyone seeking liberation from the chaos within. Buddha did not promise a life free from pain or challenge. Instead, he revealed that peace comes not from escaping life, but from understanding it deeply. Through mindfulness, compassion, and wisdom, he showed that fear and anxiety are illusions sustained by attachment and ignorance. To dissolve them, one must awaken, not in a mystical sense, but through direct insight into the nature of reality, impermanence, and the self. This journey toward inner freedom is not a sudden leap. It is a gradual unfolding. Each lesson of the Buddha acts like a lantern in the dark corridors of the mind, guiding us back to serenity. In this path, we do not fight fear. We see through it. We do not suppress anxiety. We understand its roots and let them dissolve. In the following lessons, we will explore 7 profound teachings from the Buddha that can transform the way you perceive fear, anxiety, and life itself. Each lesson is an invitation to return to the stillness within you, to the awareness that remains untouched by the storms of thought. Let us begin. Understanding the nature of fear. Fear arises when the mind projects itself into the future. It imagines what could go wrong, what could be lost, what might never come. The Buddha described this as the result of tanha, or craving, our endless desire for control, permanence, and certainty. When the mind clings to the illusion that it can secure the future, it naturally creates anxiety, for the future is unknowable and uncontrollable. To understand fear, one must first see it for what it is, a mental construction. It is not the event itself that causes fear, but our interpretation of it. 2 people can face the same situation, illness, loss, or failure, yet one remains calm while the other trembles. The difference lies in perception. The Buddha often said, "With our thoughts, we make the world." When our thoughts are rooted in ignorance, the world appears hostile and uncertain. When they are rooted in awareness, the world becomes a teacher, not a threat. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha teaches that the root of suffering is attachment. Fear at its core is attachment in disguise, attachment to life, to others, to success, to identity. We fear losing what we think defines us. The body fears pain, the ego fears humiliation, and the mind fears the unknown. Yet all of these fears arise from the same source, ignorance of our true nature. The enlightened mind sees that nothing is truly lost, for all things are impermanent. Fear loses its grip when we no longer demand that the world obey our expectations. Imagine standing before a storm. The unenlightened mind fights against the wind, wishing for calm. The awakened mind simply observes the storm, knowing that it too shall pass. To dissolve fear, we must shift from reaction to observation. When fear arises, do not resist it. Sit with it. Breathe. Ask, what am I truly afraid of losing? Is that thing permanent? Is it truly mine? In that questioning, fear begins to unravel, revealing the emptiness beneath it. The Buddha also taught that fear thrives in ignorance and fades in the light of understanding. When you recognize that fear is not an external enemy, but a part of the mind's protective mechanism, you stop fighting it. You simply watch. Awareness itself becomes the cure. Just as darkness disappears in the presence of light, fear dissolves in the presence of awareness. One powerful practice is mindful breathing. When the mind is caught in fearful anticipation, anchor yourself in the breath. Feel each inhalation as life entering you, and each exhalation as release. The present moment cannot coexist with fear, because fear is always about what might happen next. By returning to the now, you return to peace. Another key aspect of overcoming fear is compassion. When you cultivate compassion for yourself and others, fear finds no soil to grow. Compassion softens the heart. It dissolves the illusion of separation that fuels fear. When you see others not as threats but as fellow travelers on the same path, your fear transforms into understanding. The Buddha compared the mind to a clear lake. When disturbed by fear, its waters ripple, distorting the reflection of reality. Only when the lake is still can it reflect truth. The purpose of meditation is not to suppress fear, but to calm the waters so you can see clearly again. To live without fear is not to become reckless, but to act from wisdom instead of panic. It is to understand that uncertainty is not the enemy. It is the very fabric of existence. When you embrace impermanence, you discover a freedom that cannot be shaken. In truth, fear is not your enemy, it is your teacher. It points to where you are still clinging, where you still believe you are separate from the flow of life. Each fear reveals an attachment waiting to be released. In this way, fear becomes a doorway to awakening. If you wish to live without fear or anxiety, begin by watching the mind. Do not identify with its stories. You are not the one who fears. You are the awareness in which fear appears. The more you rest in that awareness, the less power fear has over you. And remember, transformation takes time. Even the Buddha faced moments of uncertainty before enlightenment. What matters is persistence, returning again and again to mindfulness until awareness becomes your natural state. If this first lesson resonates with you and you wish to keep deepening your understanding of Buddhist wisdom, take a moment now to subscribe to the channel. By doing so, you'll continue walking this path of insight, peace, and liberation with us. The root of anxiety is attachment. Anxiety, in the Buddha's understanding, does not arise from the outside world, but from the inner grasping of the mind. It is the child of attachment, the silent tension between what is and what we wish things to be. Whenever the mind clings, it creates a knot in the flow of existence. That knot is what we feel as anxiety. The Buddha taught that suffering begins when we mistake the impermanent for the permanent, when we take possession of what can never be owned. This is the foundation of dukkha, the unsatisfactory nature of life. As long as we cling to fleeting forms, pleasure, approval, control, identity, our peace will always depend on conditions that can vanish in an instant. To see through anxiety, one must first understand this attachment, this invisible chain that ties the heart to illusions. It is not the world that makes us anxious. It is our resistance to the world's natural movement. Life changes, but we want it to stay still. People leave, but we want them to remain. We grow older, yet we desire eternal youth. When the mind refuses impermanence, it fights reality, and that fight is what anxiety feels like. The Buddha often compared attachment to holding a burning coal with the intention of throwing it at someone else. It is we who get burned first. Anxiety is the heat of that burning coal, the result of grasping what was never meant to be held. If you observe the mind closely, you will notice that anxiety is a dance between the past and the future. The past provides the weight of regret, guilt, or nostalgia, and the future supplies the fuel of worry and anticipation. Together, they build a prison of thought that pulls us away from the present, where peace truly lives. The Buddha called this the wandering mind, a mind that moves endlessly between what has been and what might be, never resting in what is. When we are fully present, anxiety has no oxygen, because it can only exist in imagined time. Yet to live without attachment is not to reject life. The Buddha did not teach renunciation in the sense of running away from the world, but in the sense of not being owned by it, to love without clinging, to act without expectation, to live without fear of loss. This is freedom. The anxious person is constantly measuring, comparing and predicting. Will this last? What if it ends? What if I fail? Such thoughts arise from the illusion that security can be found in external things. But as the Buddha observed, everything that begins will end. The wise do not seek safety in the temporary. They find peace in the eternal awareness that watches all things come and go. When anxiety rises, the first impulse of the untrained mind is to fight or escape it. We distract ourselves with noise, comfort, or control. But the Buddha taught the opposite: to stay, to breathe, to observe without judgment, to simply be aware of the feeling of anxiety without labeling it as bad or good. When you stop resisting it, you begin to see its structure, the tension in the body, the rapid heartbeat, the thoughts that predict disaster. You see that anxiety is not one solid thing, but a collection of sensations and thoughts, constantly changing. When observed in this way, it loses its solidity. The observer and the observed are not the same. You are not anxious, you are the awareness that notices anxiety. This insight is transformative. Once you stop identifying with the anxious mind, it begins to lose its power. The Buddha compared the mind to a monkey jumping from branch to branch, always restless, never satisfied. Through mindfulness, we learn to sit under the tree and simply watch the monkey. Over time, the monkey tires, the mind quiets, and peace arises naturally. Meditation is not a fight against thought. It is the recognition that you are the space in which thought happens. In that spacious awareness, anxiety cannot survive for long. Attachment takes many forms. Some cling to relationships, others to possessions, reputation, or success. Yet beneath them all lies the same fear, the fear of not being enough. We attach because we believe that something outside will complete us. But the Buddha revealed that we are already whole. The search for fulfillment through external means is like trying to fill a leaking bucket. No matter how much we pour in, emptiness returns. Anxiety thrives on that illusion, that peace lies somewhere else, in another time, another achievement, another person. Freedom begins when you stop chasing and start seeing that the world's nature is change, that joy and sorrow are waves on the same ocean. When you let go of trying to hold the waves, you discover the stillness beneath them. The mind that accepts change no longer trembles, it flows. The Buddha's path of liberation begins with right view, the understanding that everything conditioned is impermanent and therefore cannot be the source of lasting happiness. When this understanding deepens into direct experience, attachment begins to dissolve naturally. Imagine you're holding a handful of sand. The tighter you squeeze, the more it slips away. This is the law of attachment. What you cling to, you lose. The Buddha saw that freedom is not gained by possession, but by release. The heart that lets go is the heart that rests. There is a subtle paradox here. Many fear letting go because they believe it means losing what they love. Yet in truth, it is attachment that prevents genuine love from existing. To love without fear, one must love without ownership. When you let others be as they are, your heart becomes vast. Anxiety cannot coexist with vastness. It lives only in the narrow spaces of me and mine. The Buddha encouraged the cultivation of metta, loving kindness, precisely because it expands the heart beyond self-concern. When you wish well for all beings, even those who hurt you, you transcend the boundaries of the ego that breeds anxiety. The practice of non-attachment is not cold indifference. It is warm clarity. It is understanding that everything has its place and everything changes. It is trusting the rhythm of the universe even when it is not in tune with your desires. It is knowing that what is meant for you cannot be lost, and what is not meant for you cannot be kept. Such faith is not blind. It arises from deep observation of life's patterns. The Buddha himself faced loss, betrayal, and physical pain, yet his serenity remained unshaken because he understood impermanence not as a tragedy, but as a truth. Many of our anxieties come from resisting endings. We do not want relationships to end, seasons to change, or loved ones to die. But endings are not the opposite of life. They are part of its design. The flower blooms and fades. The tide rises and falls. The Buddha saw that clinging to permanence is like trying to stop the tide with your hands. It only exhausts you. Peace is not found by halting the waves, but by learning to surf them. Consider the practice of observing impermanence directly. Sit quietly and notice your breath. Each inhalation arises and disappears. Each heartbeat comes and goes. Even your thoughts appear and dissolve. You begin to see that life is a continuous process, not a fixed event. When you live in harmony with this rhythm, anxiety lessens. Because anxiety is always the voice that says, "This must not change." And yet, everything does. The Buddha also pointed out that anxiety stems from ignorance of the self. We fear losing what we call me and mine. But who is this me? When you look deeply, you find that the self is not a solid entity, but a collection of experiences, memories, sensations, and thoughts, constantly shifting. Like a flame, it exists only as a process. The insight of anatta or non-self reveals that there is no permanent I that can lose or gain anything. When this truth is seen, fear and anxiety lose their foundation. For what can be threatened when there is no separate self to protect? This does not mean apathy, it means liberation. You still care, but without fear. You still act, but without anxiety about results. You live fully because you are no longer consumed by the illusion of control. The Buddha's middle way teaches balance, not excessive indulgence nor harsh denial. Anxiety is born from extremes, wanting too much, avoiding too much, thinking too much. The middle way is a quiet acceptance of life as it is. To practice this in daily life, start by noticing where you feel tension. Each anxiety points to a hidden attachment. Perhaps you are attached to being liked, to succeeding, to staying safe. Acknowledge it gently. Do not condemn it. Simply see it. The moment you recognize attachment as attachment, it begins to lose its grip. Awareness melts the chains one by one. Another powerful practice is generosity. When you give freely, without expecting anything in return, you train the mind to release. Each act of giving weakens the illusion of possession. Anxiety shrinks when the heart expands. The Buddha emphasized dana, the practice of giving, not as a moral duty, but as a medicine for attachment. When you offer kindness, time, or resources without holding back, you experience the joy of freedom, the joy of not being owned by what you have. It is also important to recognize that the path of non-attachment is gradual. You cannot force the mind to let go. It releases naturally when it sees the futility of clinging. Just as a child stops holding a broken toy when it realizes it no longer brings joy, so too does the mature mind let go when it understands the impermanent nature of all things. Insight, not effort, dissolves attachment. Meditation reveals this truth in direct experience. When you sit in stillness and observe the breath, you notice thoughts and emotions arise and pass. At first you might try to control them, but soon you see that control is impossible. Everything comes and goes by itself. You begin to trust that letting go does not lead to chaos. It leads to peace. The more you surrender control, the more spacious and clear the mind becomes. The Buddha's wisdom reminds us that attachment and anxiety feed each other. The more we cling, the more we fear losing. The more we fear losing, the tighter we cling. To break this cycle, we must introduce understanding. When understanding enters, fear departs. Knowledge of impermanence is the sword that cuts the knot of anxiety. There is also a subtle form of attachment to ideas and beliefs. Many suffer because they hold tightly to opinions about how life should be. When reality contradicts those expectations, anxiety arises. The Buddha advised letting go even of views, saying, "Those who cling to views dispute, those who see let go." This does not mean abandoning wisdom, but rather holding knowledge lightly, with humility. When you stop demanding that life fit your picture, peace returns. Anxiety, in its deepest form, is the refusal to trust existence. It is the belief that life is an enemy to be managed rather than a flow to be joined. The Buddha invites us to trust, not in fate, but in the law of cause and effect, karma. When you live with wisdom, compassion, and mindfulness, the future takes care of itself. Anxiety fades when faith in the path grows. The path itself becomes your refuge. Every anxious thought is a messenger reminding you to return to presence. It whispers, "You are trying to control what cannot be controlled." When you hear that message, breathe and release. The Buddha's path is not about removing all desires, but about seeing clearly which ones cause suffering. The desire for truth and liberation is wholesome. The desire for control and possession is the root of anxiety. In silence, this truth becomes clear. When you sit quietly and simply observe, anxiety has nowhere to hide. It tries to rise, but without your attention, it loses energy. Awareness is like sunlight. Anxiety is like mist. The more sunlight there is, the faster the mist evaporates. To live without anxiety does not mean living without care. It means caring deeply while knowing that everything passes. It means acting wisely while accepting uncertainty. It means walking the path without demanding that it be smooth. The Buddha found peace not because the world was perfect, but because he saw its imperfection clearly and loved it anyway. The end of anxiety is not a future event. It is a present realization. When you stop running after peace and simply rest in awareness, you discover it was always there. The Buddha said, "Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without." Every anxious thought is an opportunity to practice that truth. And so, to live without fear or anxiety, you must learn to let go, not of the world, but of your clinging to it. Let go of needing to know, to control, to guarantee. Let life unfold as it will, and trust your inner awareness to meet it with clarity. When you do this, anxiety no longer defines you. It becomes a passing wave in the vast ocean of consciousness. Remember, the Buddha's path is not about perfection, but awakening. Every moment of anxiety is a chance to awaken, to see where you are still holding on, and to release gently. Each release is a return to freedom. If this reflection has helped you understand your own anxiety and the nature of attachment, consider subscribing to the channel. Your presence supports the continuation of teachings like this one and keeps this community of mindful seekers growing together on the path of peace and liberation, the illusion of control, and the path to surrender. Human beings cling to the idea of control as if it were a lifeline. We spend our days trying to shape the world into our image, believing that if only we could predict and manage every outcome, we would finally be safe. Yet, as the Buddha taught, control is an illusion, and the effort to sustain that illusion is the birthplace of fear. Anxiety thrives where control is worshipped. It is the child of a mind that refuses to accept the truth that life moves according to its own rhythm, not ours. When we try to command the flow of existence, we exhaust ourselves. When we learn to flow with it, peace returns. The Buddha did not call for passivity or neglect of responsibility. Instead, he revealed a higher form of wisdom, what could be called active surrender. It is the art of acting fully, sincerely, and wisely, without the inner demand that everything must unfold as we wish. The Buddha's teaching on the middle way is, in essence, the path between control and chaos. To live without fear, one must release the belief that life owes us certainty. Fear is born in the gap between expectation and reality, and the mind that insists on control lives constantly in that gap, trembling before the unknown. If you look deeply, you will notice that every anxious thought is a demand for control. We worry because we want a guarantee. We want tomorrow to bend to our plans. We want others to act according to our desires. We want our bodies to obey, our relationships to endure, our careers to progress as imagined. And when life, in its infinite complexity, resists these demands, we suffer. The Buddha saw clearly that the desire to control is rooted in ignorance, the ignorance of anicca, impermanence. We try to control because we believe things can remain fixed, but in truth, everything is in motion. The more we struggle to hold the river, the more it slips through our fingers. True surrender is not weakness, it is wisdom. It is seeing clearly that the river of life does not need our permission to flow. It is realizing that what we call my life is not entirely ours. It belongs to the great unfolding of existence. The Buddha's enlightenment under the Bodhi tree was not a conquest of the world, but a surrender to reality. He stopped trying to escape, to fight, or to control. He simply saw things as they were, and in that seeing, he was freed. Fear loses its power when we no longer demand that life obey us. When you stop insisting that every outcome must be pleasant, you stop fearing unpleasantness. When you stop clinging to pleasure, pain loses its sting. The Buddha described this as freedom from duality, the understanding that joy and sorrow, success and failure, life and death are all part of the same flow. Control arises from aversion and craving. Surrender arises from wisdom and faith. The former binds, the latter liberates. The modern mind, conditioned by ambition and comparison, struggles deeply with surrender. From childhood, we are taught that to be strong means to be in control of ourselves, of our emotions, of our destinies. Yet the Buddha would say that true strength lies in understanding that nothing external can ever truly be controlled. You can train the body, refine the mind, and cultivate virtue, but even these will one day pass. The wise do not cling to control, they cultivate presence. Presence is the natural state that emerges when you stop trying to manage life and begin to experience it. To surrender, in the Buddhist sense, does not mean to give up. It means to give over. It is to offer your actions to the flow of life without demanding ownership of the results. The Buddha's teaching of karma points precisely to this balance. You are responsible for your actions, but not for their fruits. You can plant the seed, water the soil, and care for the plant, but you cannot command the sun or the rain. Anxiety is born when we confuse effort with control, when we believe that results must mirror our intentions. The Buddha's wisdom lies in knowing that our role is to act mindfully and let the rest unfold naturally. Consider the practice of mindfulness itself. When you sit to meditate, the first thing you encounter is the restless urge to control your experience. You want the mind to be quiet, the breath to be steady, the body to be still. Yet the harder you try, the more the mind rebels. This is the mirror of life. The very effort to control the mind is what keeps it agitated. The Buddha's instruction is simple. Observe without interference. Let thoughts arise and pass. Let sensations appear and dissolve. Slowly, the mind learns that it does not have to control anything to be at peace. Peace is already present when control ends. Fear and anxiety dissolve when you begin to trust the rhythm of life. This trust is not naive optimism. It is grounded in wisdom. You trust because you see that everything that arises also passes away. You see that the body heals, that wounds close, that even grief transforms over time. You realize that reality is self-correcting, that existence itself has intelligence. The Buddha called this the law of Dhamma, the natural order of things. When you align with it, you no longer feel the need to force outcomes. Life carries you as the river carries the leaf. Many fear surrender because they equate it with loss of identity. If I do not control, who am I? The truth is that control feeds the illusion of self. When you release control, the sense of separation begins to fade. You see that your will is not apart from the universe's will. It is part of it. The breath you take is not yours. It is the universe breathing through you. The beating of your heart, the unfolding of thoughts, the appearance of emotions, all of it happens effortlessly. Surrender is simply aligning with that effortless rhythm instead of fighting against it. The Buddha once compared life to a lute. If the strings are too tight, they break. If they are too loose, they make no sound. The middle path is balance, the string that vibrates perfectly between effort and ease. Anxiety is the sound of a life wound too tightly with control. Surrender loosens the tension, allowing the natural music of being to play. You cannot force harmony, you can only allow it. In relationships, this lesson is profound. Much of our suffering in love comes from the desire to control others, to shape them according to our expectations, to make them stay, to make them love us in a certain way. But as the Buddha said, attachment is suffering. To truly love is to allow. It is to hold the other as one holds a bird, not too tight, not too loose. Anxiety in relationships often arises from fear of loss, but surrender transforms that fear into gratitude. Instead of fearing that something will end, you cherish that it exists at all. Each moment becomes sacred because it is transient. The Buddha's own journey shows the transformation from control to surrender. In his early years of ascetic practice, he pushed the body to extremes, believing that enlightenment could be achieved through willpower. But after years of self-denial, he realized the futility of control. He sat under the Bodhi tree and surrendered completely. "Let my body wither if it must," he said, "but I will not move until I see truth." In that moment of utter surrender, truth revealed itself. Enlightenment came not through force, but through release. Fear is the shadow of control. When control ends, fear dissolves. Every anxious thought is a manifestation of the false belief that life must go according to your plan. The Buddha invites you to drop that plan, to see that life itself is the plan. When you no longer resist what is, suffering ends. This is not fatalism, it is freedom. It means you engage with life fully, but without inner conflict. In the practice of meditation, surrender deepens naturally. At first you might sit and feel restless, wanting silence, wanting insight, wanting progress. But as you continue, you notice that the more you want, the more disturbed you become. Then one day, you stop wanting. You simply sit, you let the breath breathe itself, you let the thoughts come and go, and suddenly peace arises, not because you achieved it, but because you stopped trying. This is the mystery of surrender. It reveals what has always been. To live without anxiety, one must surrender not only external control, but internal control as well. We often try to control our emotions, resisting sadness, suppressing anger, chasing joy. But emotions are waves. They come and go by their nature. When you resist, they grow stronger. When you allow them to pass through, they complete their cycle and dissolve. The Buddha compared emotions to visitors in a house. Let them come and go, but do not invite them to stay. The house is awareness, and awareness is untouched. The more you live in alignment with awareness, the more effortless life becomes. Anxiety fades because the future loses its power to threaten you. You no longer demand certainty. You no longer expect life to fit your design. You simply meet each moment with clarity and compassion. Even pain becomes a teacher, not an enemy. The Buddha said that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Suffering is what happens when the mind says, "This should not be happening." When that thought disappears, pain becomes just another experience in the flow of existence. Surrender also means trusting that life will give you exactly the lessons you need. Every disappointment, every challenge, every loss, these are not punishments, but invitations to awaken. The Buddha faced countless trials, yet each deepened his compassion. When you accept that the path includes both light and shadow, you stop fearing difficulty. You begin to see anxiety itself as a messenger, pointing you toward areas where you still cling. In this way, anxiety becomes an ally on the path to freedom. To cultivate surrender in daily life, start small. When something minor does not go as planned, notice the mind's reaction. Notice how it tenses, how it tries to fix or control. Then pause, breathe, allow the situation to be as it is. You will feel discomfort at first, but if you stay present, that discomfort will fade. Each time you practice acceptance, you strengthen the muscle of surrender. Over time, this becomes natural. You no longer fight life, you flow with it. One of the most beautiful expressions of surrender in Buddhist teaching is anicca vata sankhara, which means all conditioned things are impermanent. This is not a statement of despair, but of liberation. When you truly understand impermanence, you no longer try to make anything permanent, not happiness, not relationships, not even your identity. You begin to dance with change instead of resisting it. And in that dance, anxiety vanishes. Imagine for a moment that you are floating on the surface of a vast ocean. If you stiffen your body, you begin to sink. If you relax, you float. Life works the same way. Anxiety is stiffness. Surrender is relaxation. The ocean of existence will always carry you if you allow it. This is what the Buddha discovered, that beneath all striving lies an infinite stillness, an intelligence that holds everything together. When you surrender to it, you are home. Control promises security but delivers fear. Surrender promises nothing but gives everything. The mind that surrenders discovers that life is trustworthy. It may not always be comfortable, but it is always meaningful. Every moment becomes part of the path, every breath a prayer. You no longer need to predict the future because you are fully alive now. The practice of surrender transforms anxiety into awe. When you stop demanding that life follow your plan, you begin to see the beauty of how it unfolds on its own. The coincidences, the timing, the lessons, they all reveal a deeper intelligence. The Buddha called this the interconnectedness of all things. When you see that every being, every event, every experience is part of one vast web of cause and effect, fear dissolves. You realize that you are not a separate drop in the ocean. You are the ocean looking at itself. In the end, control was never real. It was only the mind's attempt to avoid vulnerability. But vulnerability is not weakness. It is truth. To be alive is to be uncertain. To love is to risk loss. To grow is to step into the unknown. The Buddha did not offer certainty. He offered awakening. Awakening means seeing clearly that uncertainty is not the enemy. It is the gateway to freedom. When you stop fighting for control, you make space for wisdom to guide you. You begin to act not from fear, but from intuition. You trust the silence within more than the noise of the world. Decisions become clearer, not because you know everything, but because you are no longer clouded by anxiety. You see that each step reveals the next. You do not need the whole map. You only need the courage to take the next step. To live without fear or anxiety is not to eliminate uncertainty, but to make peace with it. The Buddha's teachings guide us toward that peace, not by changing the world, but by changing the way we see it. Life has always been uncertain. It always will be. But within that uncertainty lies infinite possibility. The mind that surrenders to the flow finds that it has nothing to lose, because it was never separate from life in the first place. Let this truth sink deeply. Control is suffering. Surrender is freedom. When you release control, you do not lose yourself. You find yourself in everything. The birds, the wind, the laughter, the tears, all of it becomes sacred because all of it is part of the great dance of being. If this reflection has helped you see the futility of control and the peace of surrender, consider subscribing to the channel. By doing so, you continue this journey of inner awakening, walking the same timeless path the Buddha once walked. One step, one breath, one surrender at a time. The power of mindfulness, dwelling fully in the present moment. To understand fear and anxiety, one must first understand the nature of the mind. The Buddha once said that the mind is everything. What we think, we become. Every joy, every sorrow, every illusion begins there. When untrained, the mind behaves like a wild elephant, charging from past regrets to future worries, trampling the peace of the present under its feet. But when tamed through mindfulness, the same mind becomes a source of immeasurable clarity and serenity. The Buddha taught mindfulness not as a technique to escape life, but as a sacred art of living deeply within it, moment to moment, breath to breath. Fear and anxiety cannot survive in the present moment because they depend on time. Fear lives in anticipation. Anxiety feeds on projection. The mind imagines what could happen, and the body reacts as though it already has. In this way, anxiety is a ghost from the future haunting the present. The Buddha saw this clearly. He said that those who are mindful dwell in the eternal now. They walk freely, untouched by the storms of thought. Mindfulness, therefore, is not merely paying attention. It is liberation from the tyranny of time. When you are mindful, you see life as it truly is. You notice the rise and fall of the breath, the sensations in the body, the sounds around you. You become the witness rather than the participant in the drama of thought. This witnessing reveals a truth that shatters fear. Everything arises and passes away. The wave of a thought comes, peaks, and dissolves. The flutter of anxiety appears and fades. When you observe closely, you realize that no experience is permanent, and therefore no fear is eternal. The more you see this, the freer you become. An anxious mind lives in resistance. It does not want what is, it wants something else. Mindfulness teaches the opposite, acceptance. To sit quietly and breathe without trying to change anything is a radical act in a world obsessed with control. In that stillness, you learn that peace does not come from rearranging circumstances, but from seeing them clearly. You begin to understand that even your thoughts are not yours. They arise from causes and conditions, like clouds forming in the sky. When the causes disappear, the thoughts dissolve. The self you once defended so fiercely begins to lose its solidity. Without a fixed self to protect, fear has nowhere to root itself. In the practice of mindfulness, every moment becomes sacred. Washing your hands, drinking water, walking, breathing, all can be gateways to awareness. The Buddha's disciples were instructed to be mindful even while eating, feeling each bite, chewing slowly, aware of the nourishment entering the body. In such simplicity lies profound peace. When the mind is fully present, it cannot wander into the painful labyrinth of what-ifs. Anxiety thrives on absence, on the absence of attention, the absence of presence. To heal anxiety, therefore, one must return to the body, to the now, again and again. There is a famous story of the Buddha walking silently with his disciples. One of them asked, "Master, what do you do when you walk?" The Buddha replied, "I walk." The disciple, puzzled, asked again, "And what do you do when you eat?" The Buddha smiled, "I eat." The disciple pressed further, "But Master, we all walk and eat. What is the difference?" The Buddha said, "When you walk, your mind is elsewhere. When I walk, I am only walking." That is the essence of mindfulness, to be completely where you are, doing only what you are doing. In modern times, our minds are scattered across screens, plans, worries, and comparisons. We are physically in one place, but mentally in 1,000. This fragmentation creates inner noise, and that noise becomes anxiety. The Buddha's path is silence, not the absence of sound, but the absence of inner turmoil. When the mind is silent, fear dissolves naturally, because fear needs a story to survive, and silence holds no story. Mindfulness also reveals that fear is not as solid as it seems. When fear arises, observe it. Feel its energy without labeling it as bad. Where does it live in the body? Perhaps in the chest, the stomach, the throat. Instead of running from it, breathe into it. Watch how it changes shape, how it comes and goes. You will notice that what you called fear is not one thing but a collection of sensations: heat, tightness, trembling, thought. Once you stop naming it, it loses its identity. It becomes just another wave in the ocean of awareness. This direct observation is what the Buddha called insight. Seeing things as they truly are. The practice of mindfulness is like polishing a mirror. At first, the mirror of the mind is clouded by dust, memories, desires, fears, judgments. When you sit quietly, watching your breath, you begin to wipe away the dust. Slowly, the reflection becomes clear. You begin to see yourself and the world without distortion. In that clarity, fear has no place to hide. You realize that you are not the dust, not even the reflection, but the mirror itself, the awareness in which everything appears. Awareness is untouched by what it reflects. Through mindfulness, we also begin to understand that suffering comes not from what happens, but from how we relate to it. The Buddha compared life to a river, sometimes calm, sometimes stormy. The mindful person does not try to stop the current, they learn to float. When fear arises, instead of struggling against it, they allow it to flow through. In time, the waves subside, and the natural stillness of the river returns. Anxiety loses its grip because there is no longer a self clinging to it. Mindfulness transforms the ordinary into the extraordinary. A single breath, when observed fully, becomes a universe of wonder. You see how the body inhales oxygen given by trees, how the trees breathe out what you exhale, how every breath connects you to all of life. This awareness dissolves the illusion of separation, the root of all fear. You are not a small, fragile being in a hostile world. You are part of an infinite, interdependent whole. When you feel that truth in your bones, anxiety melts like frost in the morning sun. Yet mindfulness is not something you do once and master. It is a lifelong path. The mind will wander, that is its nature, but every time you bring it back, gently, patiently, you are training it, just as a gardener tends a plant. Each moment of returning is an act of love, a reminder that you are not lost, only distracted. Fear loses its strength not through force, but through consistent awareness. The Buddha often emphasized sati, which means remembrance, not merely of the present moment, but remembrance of truth. To be mindful is to remember who you are beyond the noise, awareness itself. When you remember this, the fears of the world appear small. Death, loss, uncertainty, all become part of the great flow. You do not deny them, you embrace them as teachers. Mindfulness also awakens compassion. As you observe your own suffering without judgment, your heart softens toward others. You see that everyone is fighting their own invisible battles. The person who is angry, the one who is fearful, the one who is cruel, all are trapped in the same illusion of separation. This understanding dissolves resentment and replaces it with empathy. Compassion is the natural fragrance of mindfulness, and where compassion blooms, fear cannot thrive. In meditation, there are moments when the boundary between observer and observed disappears. You no longer feel like a person watching the breath. You become the breath itself. This merging is not imagination. It is a glimpse of non-duality, the truth that there is no separate you apart from experience. When that realization deepens, fear of death vanishes, for death is only a change in form, not in essence. The awareness that sees birth and death is itself unborn and undying. The Buddha called this nibbana, the extinguishing of delusion, the cooling of the fires of craving and fear. In daily life, mindfulness becomes a refuge. When anxiety arises, you no longer run to distractions or external comfort. You turn inward to the quiet sanctuary of the present. You take one conscious breath, and in that breath you find stability. The body may still shake, the heart may still race, but awareness remains unmoved. Like the eye of a storm, it is calm amidst chaos. The more you rest in that stillness, the more it grows. Eventually, you realize that peace was never lost. It was only covered by thought. The Buddha's teaching on mindfulness also includes awareness of impermanence. When you observe your thoughts, you see that they constantly change. When you observe your emotions, you see that they come and go. Even the body, which we cling to as I, is in continuous transformation. This understanding frees you from fear, because fear depends on permanence. We fear losing what we think will last forever, but when you see that nothing lasts, you stop resisting. You begin to live in rhythm with change instead of against it. There is an ancient Buddhist saying, "When walking, walk. When sitting, sit. Above all, don't wobble." Adage, this simple advice, captures the heart of mindfulness. To not wobble means to be unwaveringly present. Whether you are washing dishes or facing a great loss, stay where you are. Feel it fully. Do not escape into thought or fantasy. When you face life directly, you discover a strength you never knew. Fear dissipates because you are no longer running from anything. Even suffering becomes sacred under the light of mindfulness. When you observe pain without adding the story of "why me," it loses its poison. The Buddha once said that an unmindful person is struck by two arrows. The first is the pain itself. The second is the mental resistance to it. The mindful person feels only the first arrow. The second arrow, the suffering created by the mind, never lands. Anxiety is the second arrow. It is the wound we inflict upon ourselves by refusing to be present. To practice mindfulness, you do not need rituals or beliefs. You need only attention. Sit quietly, feel your breath, notice the sensations in your body, notice the thoughts that pass like clouds. Every time you drift, gently return. This returning is the heart of the practice. Over time, you will notice gaps between thoughts, moments of pure awareness, still and vast. In those moments there is no fear, no desire, no anxiety, only being. Mindfulness is also the gateway to wisdom. When you observe without judgment, you begin to see patterns. You notice how desire leads to agitation, how resistance leads to pain, how acceptance brings peace. You start to live intelligently, not according to impulse, but according to understanding. The Buddha called this prajna, or insight. Insight cuts through fear, because it reveals that fear is born from misunderstanding. The more you see clearly, the less you suffer. To live mindfully is to live slowly, intentionally. It means to give your full attention to what is before you. When you listen, truly listen. When you speak, speak with awareness. When you eat, taste the food. When you walk, feel the ground beneath your feet. These small acts are powerful because they anchor you in the present, where fear cannot enter. Life becomes simpler yet infinitely richer. In mindfulness, you also discover gratitude. The anxious mind is always looking for what is missing. The mindful mind sees what is already here. The sound of the wind, the warmth of sunlight, the rhythm of your breath all become miracles. Gratitude transforms perception. What once seemed ordinary becomes divine. Anxiety, which feeds on dissatisfaction, finds no food in a grateful heart. Through mindfulness, you realize that peace was never dependent on circumstances. It was always within, waiting for attention. The world may still change, challenges may still come, but you are no longer tossed by them. You respond instead of react. You listen instead of panic. You see instead of assume. Each mindful moment becomes an act of liberation. Mindfulness also teaches humility. You begin to see that you are not the center of the universe, but a part of a vast, interconnected web. This dissolves the ego that breeds fear. You see that your joy is tied to others' joy, your peace to others' peace. Compassion becomes natural because you no longer see others as separate. In that oneness, fear has no ground to stand on. When you cultivate mindfulness long enough, even death loses its sting. You see that birth and death are simply transitions in the infinite unfolding of existence. The awareness that knows them is timeless. You no longer fear what comes after because you live fully in what is now. The Buddha's serenity in the face of death was not detachment, but realization. He knew that what dies is form, not essence. Awareness continues, silent and vast, beyond the reach of fear. To live mindfully is to live courageously. It takes courage to stay present in a world that constantly pulls you away. But every moment of presence weakens fear's hold. You begin to trust life more, to trust yourself more. Anxiety becomes a visitor rather than a master. And eventually, even when it knocks, you can greet it with calm eyes and an open heart, knowing it too will pass. Remember, mindfulness is not about perfection. It is about presence. The mind will wander, fear will return, anxiety will whisper, but you can always return to awareness. Each return is a victory, a small awakening. In time, those moments of awakening join together like stars in a night sky, illuminating the vast peace that was always there. If this lesson on mindfulness has spoken to you, if you felt even a glimpse of stillness while reading these words, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Together, we can continue walking the path of awareness and peace, one mindful breath at a time. The impermanence of all things. Freedom beyond loss. At the heart of the Buddha's teaching lies a truth both simple and terrifying. Everything changes. Nothing lasts. The body ages, the mind shifts, mountains erode, stars burn out. Even the deepest joy, the most stable peace, will eventually transform. For the unawakened mind, this truth seems unbearable. For the awakened one, it is the very doorway to freedom. The Buddha called this law anicca, impermanence. To see impermanence clearly is to pierce through illusion. To deny it is to live in constant fear. Every form of anxiety at its root is a rebellion against impermanence. We cling because we want something to stay. We suffer because it cannot. Most people live as if permanence were possible. We believe our relationships, possessions, health, and even identities will remain as they are. We plan, we secure, we invest, we build walls around what we love. Yet the more we cling, the more we suffer, because reality refuses to obey our desires. It flows. The Buddha did not teach impermanence to cause despair, but to bring relief. If nothing lasts, then neither does pain. If all things pass, then fear itself must pass too. When you truly see that everything is temporary, the desperate grasping of the heart softens. You begin to live in alignment with the flow of life, not in resistance to it. Fear is born the moment we forget impermanence. We fear losing what we love. We fear the future because we assume it must mirror the past. We fear death because we think it is an ending. But impermanence reveals that endings are illusions. Nothing truly ends. It changes form. The body dies, but the elements that compose it return to the earth. A relationship dissolves, but the love, the lessons, the energy continue in new ways. Even your thoughts, fleeting as they are, leave subtle impressions that shape new thoughts. The Buddha saw this continuum not as chaos, but as interdependence. Everything supports everything else. Nothing stands alone. To live without fear is to live with the understanding that loss is not destruction, but transformation. When you resist change, you suffer twice. First, because things change, and second, because you wished they would not. The enlightened mind accepts change as the law of life. It does not mean indifference or apathy. It means loving deeply while knowing that what you love will change. That knowledge makes love more precious, not less. When you see that every meeting will one day end, you stop taking people for granted. You listen more. You forgive faster. You cherish the small moments. Impermanence teaches gratitude because it reminds you that everything you have is temporary and therefore infinitely valuable. The Buddha once asked his disciples to contemplate decay. Not to be morbid, but to understand the fragility of existence. He urged them to look at their bodies, their surroundings, and their possessions, and to see that all were subject to change. When this understanding sinks into the heart, fear of loss diminishes. You realize that clinging to what is bound to fade is like trying to catch sunlight with your hands. The more you grasp, the less you hold. Anxiety arises when the mind fights against impermanence. It tries to freeze the flowing river of life into stillness. But the river will not stop. It will continue to move, carrying everything with it. The wise person does not stand rigid against the current, but learns to swim with it. They do not ask, "Why must this change?" but rather, "How can I move gracefully with this change?" In this way, impermanence becomes not a source of dread, but a teacher of resilience. Impermanence also dissolves pride and comparison. When you see that everything is temporary, you stop clinging to achievements, status, or possessions. You realize that all will fade in time. This realization frees you from envy and competition. You understand that life is not a race, but a rhythm. You stop measuring your worth by external standards because you see that even success is fleeting. The Buddha taught that true peace lies not in accumulating, but in releasing. When you stop trying to make things permanent, a vast stillness opens within you. Consider the seasons. Spring blooms, summer flourishes, autumn fades, winter rests. Each season serves the next. None clings to its glory. Each yields gracefully to change. The mind that understands impermanence begins to mirror the seasons. It welcomes beginnings and endings alike, seeing them as part of the same cycle. Anxiety cannot exist in such a mind because it depends on resistance. Impermanence, when embraced, ends resistance. Yet this truth is not easy to accept. The heart still aches when things change, when loved ones die, when dreams fade. The Buddha never denied that pain. He simply showed that beyond pain lies wisdom. Pain says, "This shouldn't be happening." Wisdom says, "This too is part of life." Ubi, when you stop fighting pain, you find that it transforms into understanding. You begin to see that every ending prepares the ground for something new. The falling leaf nourishes the soil for future growth. Death feeds life. Loss opens space for renewal. In meditation, you can witness impermanence directly. Sit quietly and watch your breath. Each inhalation arises, lingers, and dissolves. Thoughts appear and vanish. Sounds come and go. Emotions rise like waves and subside. The more you observe, the more you see that nothing holds still, not even your sense of self. What you call I is a stream of sensations and thoughts, constantly shifting. The one who fears death does not see this truth. When you realize that you are the awareness of change, not the changing forms themselves, fear begins to vanish. Awareness does not come and go. It witnesses all that comes and goes. The Buddha described the insight into impermanence as the first step toward enlightenment. When you see that all things arise and pass away, attachment loses its grip. You begin to live lightly, as though walking on the surface of water. You still engage with life fully, but without clinging. You still love deeply, but without trying to possess. You still plan for the future, but without anxiety about the outcome. This is the middle way, not detachment in the sense of cold withdrawal, but detachment in the sense of freedom. You participate in life, yet you are not enslaved by it. Impermanence also teaches humility. When you realize how temporary everything is, arrogance melts. You stop seeing yourself as separate from others. The same law that governs your body governs all bodies. The same impermanence that takes your joys takes everyone's joys. Compassion grows naturally from this understanding. You see that everyone suffers from the same illusion of permanence, and you begin to wish them freedom from that suffering. Compassion becomes the bridge between understanding and peace. To live without fear, you must befriend impermanence. Make it your companion instead of your enemy. Each morning when you wake, remember that this day will never return. Each evening, reflect that the day's joys and sorrows have already passed. Such awareness makes you more alive. The present moment, when seen through the lens of impermanence, glows with intensity. It is like a candle flickering in the dark. You appreciate it because you know it will not burn forever. The Buddha once held up a flower before his disciples. Only one Mahakashapa smiled. The Buddha said that Mahakashapa understood the teaching without words. That flower, soon to wilt, was a symbol of impermanence. To see its beauty fully, one must accept its death. The smile of Mahakasyapa was the smile of awakening, the joy that arises when you stop resisting change. For when you see impermanence clearly, you no longer fear it. You celebrate it. Anxiety about the future is nothing but fear of impermanence projected forward. The mind says, what if things don't go as I wish? What if I lose what I love? But what if impermanence is the very thing that allows new joys to arise? Without death there would be no birth. Without endings there would be no beginnings. The same force that takes away also gives. When you see this, the heart opens in trust. Life stops being an enemy to defend against and becomes a mystery to marvel at. Even suffering becomes meaningful in light of impermanence. Because it does not last, it can teach. Each pain reveals a truth. Each loss deepens compassion. The Buddha himself faced illness, aging, and death. He did not escape these realities. He embraced them as teachers. When his body grew weak, he reminded his followers, decay is inherent in all compounded things. His serenity in the face of death came not from denial, but from understanding. He saw that what dies is not the essence, but the form. The river continues even as the water changes. The insight of impermanence also transforms our relationship with time. We no longer chase the future or mourn the past. We see that both are mental constructions, while reality exists only here and now. The anxious mind tries to control time, to delay loss, to extend pleasure, to avoid endings. But the awakened mind flows with time, trusting its rhythm. Each moment becomes enough because it is complete in itself. You no longer need the next moment to be happy. The present becomes eternity. To contemplate impermanence is to awaken gratitude. When you realize that every breath could be your last, you begin to cherish each one. The laughter of a friend, the touch of wind, the warmth of sunlight, all become precious gifts. Anxiety fades because you no longer demand more than what is given. You live in appreciation rather than expectation. This shift changes everything. Gratitude and fear cannot occupy the same space. Where gratitude lives, anxiety withers. The Buddha compared life to a dewdrop on a blade of grass, beautiful, delicate, temporary. To deny this is to live in illusion. To accept it is to awaken. When you see life as a series of moments that arise and dissolve, you stop trying to make them permanent. You begin to dance with time instead of fighting it. The dance of impermanence is the dance of freedom. Impermanence also reveals the futility of control. When you accept that you cannot hold on to anything, not even your own thoughts, you stop struggling. You rest in awareness itself, which is the only constant. The body changes, emotions change, the world changes, but awareness remains. This awareness is what the Buddha called the deathless. To abide in it is to transcend fear, for awareness cannot die. In daily life, this insight means being fully present while knowing that everything you touch will pass. You do not harden your heart to avoid pain. You soften it to embrace all experience. You love, knowing that love will change. You grieve, knowing that grief will fade. You do not cling to joy nor run from sorrow. You move with life, not against it. This is true fearlessness. To see impermanence is to awaken from the dream of permanence that fuels anxiety. You realize that you have never truly possessed anything, not people, not things, not even moments. Everything was always borrowed, flowing through your hands like water. When you accept this, life becomes lighter. You live with open hands instead of clenched fists. The end of fear is not found in security, but in acceptance. Security is an illusion. Acceptance is truth. When you accept that everything changes, you stop trying to build walls against the wind. Instead, you learn to breathe with it. The same wind that destroys also clears the air. The same change that frightens also renews. Impermanence, when understood, is not your enemy. It is your liberation. If this teaching on impermanence has touched something within you, if it has brought even a moment of stillness or clarity, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Let these teachings continue to accompany you, to remind you that even in change, there is peace, and beyond every ending, a new beginning is already unfolding.